Late August, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and National Security Advisor John Bolton had a previously undisclosed Oval Office meeting with Trump where they tried but failed to convince him to release that money. Today, Senate Democrats arguing the new reporting bolsters their case for witnesses at the impeachment trial as Speaker Pelosi continues to withhold the actual impeachment articles, and Trump is lashing out, tweeting a series of attacks on Speaker Pelosi throughout the weekend, the latest of 48 tweets he sent about her since the House actually impeached him. With me now, former federal prosecutor John Flannery, Neera Tanden, president and CEO of the Center for American Progress and a former top aide to President Obama and Hillary Clinton, and Mark Thompson, host of the Make It Plain podcast. John, I'm going to start with you on this one. There's lots of new information here. But how do you think Democrats can use it at the impeachment trial unless there are new witnesses?
I didn't hear who you were. Were you calling on me?
Yeah, that was for you, John. Lots of new information here, but how can this actually feasibly be used without new witnesses?
Well, I think the thing that's wrong here is the entire discussion that after you impeach someone in articles, that you're restricted in any way to the evidence that you use to get the articles. Of course, you can supplement proof at a real trial in a fair tribunal with new evidence which relates to the charges at hand. So, in other words, the information from the Center for Public Integrity and what the New York Times published, all of that should be available to the Senate for a full and fair trial. So I don't think there's any question about that. We also had a strong case without this new evidence, which adds additional detail to the case against the crime syndicate that is the Trump administration with Mulvaney and his three amigos. And we keep talking about there being parallel channels. I think we finally found who was the back channel, that is Rudy Giuliani. And the willful ignorance of Mulvaney to what's going on in those private meetings was, I think, just another one of their devices to conceal what they were doing. And I think that each additional piece of information we got is further evidence that this was a shakedown, that we compromised Ukraine, and that we didn't care, and we were doing more for Putin and for Trump's re-election effort than we were doing what Congress wanted or what the nation needed or what Ukraine needed for its own security.
Willful ignorance of Mulvaney's actions here is certainly an interesting way to explain it, to say the least. Neera, you have worked in the White House. How bad is it if you have aides basically saying that Congress will be unhinged if they figure out what's happening here?
I mean, that part of the story was really, it amazed me. The idea that you would have a law passed by Congress on a very bipartisan basis, that the White House and a bunch of essentially political apparatchiks would essentially decide to, you know, just work around. I found it really stunning. And most importantly, I think the aspect of the story that is really critical is that the timing of the story really shows us that if the Senate does not call witnesses, they are essentially aiding and abetting a cover-up. Essentially, the president, these people named in these stories are the people the president is keeping from testifying. Obviously, he doesn't want them to testify because they will demonstrate his guilt. So I really think this is an issue for Republican senators who take an oath to the Constitution and take an oath to a fair trial to ensure that they live up to that oath.
Mark, you see it as just that, it seems, that this is an aiding and abetting of a cover-up with regards to Ukraine.
It's its own sort of obstruction of justice on the part of the U.S. Senate. Mitch McConnell coming out saying he's working with the White House. Jurors don't work with those on trial. That's a mistrial. So he had already set up and declared a mistrial before anything got started. I think it's very shrewd for Democrats in the House to wait. I think it's likely, as Representative Kennedy said, I believe on yesterday, that he's going to commit more articles of impeachment. But the bottom line is they can try to spin it all the ways they want to. Donald Trump is in serious trouble. He has been impeached. If they hold a trial and don't have witnesses, it's an illegitimate trial. If they hold a trial and these witnesses come forward to testify and tell the truth, things don't get any better for him, even if he is acquitted. if they hold a trial and those witnesses come forward and don't tell the truth. I consulted with your favorite legal analyst of mine, Glenn Kirshner, this afternoon to ask, if you lie in a Senate impeachment trial, is that perjury? And he said, yes, it absolutely is. So, you know, they'll have no choice but to tell the truth. They don't want to tell the truth, and I'm certain they don't want to risk telling a lie.
Let's talk about some possible witnesses here emerging, especially in this new report from the New York Times, but that have certainly emerged over the last weeks and months as we've been covering this impeachment inquiry. Mark Esper, Mike Pompeo, Mick Mulvaney, John Bolton, just some of the names that came out of this report. You saying willful ignorance of Mick Mulvaney, John, and I want to talk a little bit more about this with regards to Mulvaney and this report saying that he would actually leave the room during conversations between the president and former Mayor Rudy Giuliani because of what he says was attorney-client privilege. Does that add up to you?
No, it doesn't add up to me. It sounds like a cover story. And you have Sondland testifying that everybody knew what was going on. And it's hard to believe that Mulvaney could run the three friends, if you will, the three amigos, and not know everything that was going on, because one of those amigos was who else? Rudy Giuliani. And so when he's not in the room, I think what they're doing is trying to buy themselves deniability by cutting out Rudy, because if he's the back channel that Kushner wanted in early December of 2016 with Kislyak, then everything makes sense. Whether you send them to South America, you send them to Russia, you send them to Ukraine, you send them to Vienna, and then he comes back and delivers the goods. So he's an operative. He's the back channel that the White House has used. He is the glue that holds together this conspiracy to shake down the Ukraine. And he's one of the best witnesses to call if you don't get a deposition, because we have so many public statements by him that we can use against him to tie him up, which is one of the keys when cross-examining a witness. As for them lying, as long as we have an attorney general who's corrupt named Barr, who will prosecute no one in this administration because he believes Article 2 is without limitation and the president is like a czar, a monarch, a despot, then we have that problem. And as long as we have a president who's prepared to pardon anyone before he's forced to leave office, if that happens, we have a difficulty. The only path to protect the country is to treat the entire nation as the jurors and to attack the Senate, which will never give us a fair trial. But we have to go over there at some date, whatever that right date is, and try this case, because that's the only way we can illustrate the injustice of this Senate under the thumb of the prejudicial oversight by McConnell. And so I think in a nutshell, that's where we stand.
Neera, you're hearing from John feasibly that Mulvaney could feasibly be one of the best witnesses in this possible Senate trial. Whether or not that's going to actually happen is really the question. We heard from Senator Chuck Schumer earlier today with regards to this New York Times report. I want to read a part of his tweet here. He wrote this: every Republican senator must read this and then explain why they would oppose our reasonable request for witnesses and documents in the Senate trial. This makes the choice even more clear. Will the Senate hold a fair trial, or will it enable a cover-up? Obviously, we know John's opinion on this, and that he doesn't think the Senate's going to hold a fair trial, and this is going to play out in the American public over the next election trial. But Neera, what do you make of it? Will we actually see any of these four individuals, from Mark Esper to Mike Pompeo to Mulvaney to Bolton, actually testify? And who do you think is the best to tell this story?
I mean, I think what's stunning about the New York Times story is that reporters are able to get the facts and the Congress is not, because essentially the White House is obstructing. I mean, obviously there are patriots in the administration who are releasing emails to reporters and essentially, defying essentially a block by the administration. I respectfully disagree. I think the question of whether we have a Senate trial that is fair is really up to the Republican majority. And we have a series of Republican senators who really come from blue states, or bluish, purplish states. Senator Gardner,
but do you trust
Senator
that
Collins.
will happen? You're saying it's up to them, but do you trust that will happen, considering all that we have heard from Speaker McConnell, from Leader McConnell, excuse me, over the last couple of months?
Leader McConnell is just the wall that Susan Collins and Cory Gardner are hiding behind. This question of whether we have a Senate trial is not really a question for Mitch McConnell. It is for the Republican majority that is made up of senators who are up, some degree, are up for re-election. They make up the majority. There are a number of Republican senators who could decide. Joni Ernst, she faces voters in 2020. Cory Gardner, Tillis, 4 Republican senators decide to have a fair trial, there will be a fair trial. I think this is a Mitch McConnell strategy to just assume there will be no fair trial, to move the conversation. And I'm glad Speaker Pelosi had the wherewithal to withhold the articles of impeachment so we have not blown past this trial. Most importantly for Mitt Romney, for Cory Gardner, for all of these senators, what I would say to you is you're getting new information now. Imagine how much new information will come out in the weeks and months. And if you have a sham trial, you will be not just humiliated right now, but humiliated in the history books for covering up for your political leader.
So, Mark, do stories like the New York Times, this revelation of this sit-down between Esper, Pompeo, Bolton, and the president, do stories like this, urging the president to release that money to Ukraine in late August, 2.5 weeks before he actually did release it once the revelation of the whistleblower complaint came out. Do stories like this move the needle? Will they move the needle for some of these Republicans that Neera is talking about that could feasibly pressure McConnell to have a fair Senate trial?
I think we've even heard from, if I'm not mistaken, Lisa Murkowski in the past 24 hours.
Yes.
That she's concerned. So I think it moves the needle. I think
she's concerned with the coordination between Leader McConnell and the White House.
Right. And so I think stories like this probably help move that needle further, create greater cause for concern, because you would want all the facts to come out. And they definitely are moving the needle with the American public. It's a lose-lose. If Republican senators running for re-election in 2020 don't stand up for a fair trial and call for a fair trial, that's an issue to run against them at home. If they have a sham trial and they vote to acquit with no evidence, that's an issue to run against them at home.
All right, John Flannery, Neera Tanden, and Mark Thompson, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you guys so much.